Danilo Kawasaki, Vice President of COO and COO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management, joins me now live from Los Angeles with more. So, given this year that Apple has had, from this market cap milestone to this ongoing battle with Qualcomm, these reported product defects, how would you say the company is doing overall?
The company is doing just fine. The company is tagging along its business plan. The trillion-dollar mark maybe was a curse for the stock, but the company itself is doing just fine. In their latest quarterly earnings report, they reported record numbers, record revenues, profits. They're executing their plan really well, and that's really where Tim Cook excels. He's a great operator of the business. Apple, managed to squeeze in 30% more revenues by selling the same amount of phones as last year, and that's part of their plan is to increase that average selling price and rotate the company from being a hardware company to offer services in a more diversified business.
Now, something that may put a wrinkle in that, we saw that Bloomberg is reporting that Apple may consider moving iPhone production out of China if the tariffs hit 25% in this ongoing US-China trade spat. Where might it go, and how would consumers be affected?
Yeah, this tariff situation doesn't help anybody. It's not just Apple that this is impacting. It's basically the entire world. Tariffs are basically a tax on consumers. And this is why we're seeing some slowdown in global growth. China is a huge market for Apple and other American companies. And my hope is that this tariff situation gets resolved sooner than later. I don't see a situation where Apple would just pull out of China. Right. They have a strong presence there. They have manufacturing facilities there. Obviously, other countries in Asia will be happy to welcome Apple and their employees. But, the Chinese smartphone market is the biggest in the world, and I'm sure Apple will, fight teeth and nails to stay there.
And speaking of fighting, we know that Qualcomm and Apple have been going head-to-head for years now. But how is this latest string of legal rulings affecting Apple's bottom line potentially?
Yeah, absolutely. Today, the injunction in Germany, very similar to what happened in China. Again, my hope is that Apple ultimately settles, with Qualcomm. And again, they need to sell every phone they can so they can put in services and other things, and that's how they're planning to grow. So my hope is that they find an agreement and can move on from this pending litigation that's been going on for years now, as you pointed out.
And as we know, obviously Apple is the most well-known US smartphone company, but they've also faced backlash in China over the arrest of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. So you have a lot of this patriotic purchasing. Now, we already know that global smartphone sales are flagging. What do you think this latest move might mean for Apple?
That doesn't help. As I said, China is a big market for Apple. About 20% of their revenues come from China. And the Chinese are pride people, and they're very proud of their heritage. And the arrests that we're seeing back and forth now. I heard today a Canadian student was arrested in China for not having the right visa. And so the situation definitely doesn't help the global political environment that we're in right now. It's definitely has a negative tone to it. And that's unfortunate because, from the G20 meeting a few weeks ago, it seemed like President Trump and President Xi had a great meeting, and they agreed to kind of postpone the increase of some tariffs. Right. and work on a deal, and we were kind of within that window. And unfortunately, these arrests happen, and they're kind of somehow unrelated, and maybe they need to be dealt with, but it certainly doesn't help the overall global political environment.
Now, let's look at Apple's future. You have consumers who really seem to want to see more innovation from Apple like they did in the early days, but then you're also seeing the company itself trying to pivot and diversify itself. Does the company risk losing some of its appeal?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm sad to say, innovation really died when Steve Jobs passed away. Tim Cook is not an innovator. He's an operator. He's a great logistics guy, operational guy, but he's conservative. He doesn't like to take big chances. Apple is still sitting on $140 billion in cash. They could do something great with that money in terms of acquisitions and in creating more innovation. They also spend a ton of money in research and development. I think last year they spent about $14 billion and very little to show for. The latest product that they launched, that HomePod speaker, was basically a flop. I do see a lot of the earphones, the earpieces out. The new smartwatches are nice and have been getting great reviews. But, I've said this in the past, Apple is no longer a revolutionary company. They're just an evolutionary company, and they're kind of tagging along their plan. But, services is where really they're focusing their attention and, coming out with some streaming and music and iCloud. Right. And that's really where I see them taking the business, possibly in the future, even creating a subscription model where for, let's say, $50, you get your phone, you get your, iCloud, you get your music, you get your streaming, you get your Apple Care, and it's kind of all bundled in one simple, easy to use and affordable package.
That certainly sounds like an interesting ecosystem. Thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there. Danilo Kawasaki there, Vice President and COO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management.